Hey, this is Nate Wells.
And this is Drew Cove.
Check out our podcast, that Go for Hockey podcast, for the latest news and updates on University of Minnesota hockey. You can find us on iTunes, and we're also on the Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
That's elite.
The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Hell yeah, let's get stinko.
Welcome, Giles and the Goalie Podcast. I am your host, cracking a beer, Giles Farrell. Across the computer screen from me is Ben Remington.
Hello.
And joining us also across the computer screen from the Athletic Minnesota is Derek Peterson.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you for joining us here. We are recording post-game of Game 3 in the Stanley Cup playoffs between Minnesota Wild and Winnipeg Jets. Derek getting back on the show after a long overdue podcast in which we suffered the usual Giles and the Goalie Podcast audio problems. So,
but I think it's fair to point out that I don't think that would have been a true appearance had I not experienced some type of audio issues.
That's fair, yeah.
This is true. You get the full experience when we ask you about jerseys, soup, and then the audio goes to hell.
Yes.
No, that is quite literally the Giles and the Goalie Podcast brand. So there you go. So yeah, Minnesota Wild, Winnipeg Jets, they played Game 1 on Wednesday at MTS Center, or Bell MTS Place, or whatever they call it now for audio branding purposes. Wild down 2-1, or not down 2-1. They're down 1-0 going into the third period. They get 2 goals early in the first 4.5 minutes from Matt Cullen and Zach Parise to take the lead. And then Patrick Laine scores pretty quickly after. Joe Morrow gets the eventual game winner halfway through the period. And the Wild really couldn't generate anything after the go-ahead goal by Morrow. Thoughts on the Game 1 defeat? Was this kind of one that you're going to think maybe at the end of the series this is one that you'd probably like to have back?
Well, there's probably going to be a handful they'd like to have back by the end of the series. I don't know. I mean, it felt like they were kind of in that game, but also not in that game. It was kind of a weird feeling. It wasn't as bad as the Game 2 drubbing, but I don't know. That's playoff hockey, though. That's you have to be at the top of your game at all times. Otherwise, a team, especially a team as good as Winnipeg, is going to take advantage and punish you for mistakes. We saw a breakdown from Evan Sporer on The Athletic of the goals allowed, and you make mistakes to a team that good in the playoffs, and they're going to beat you. So I don't know that the Wild, felt like I didn't feel like the Wild were super, super close in that game. I just felt like they made a few more mistakes, and Winnipeg's going to take advantage of that every time.
Yeah, for me, that one really felt like the Wild were just doing their best not to lose. Like they were holding on for a while, and then they got. I mean, it was a gift that they got their 2 goals. I think. I mean, they were pretty good plays and good to go afterwards. It just kind of felt like they were right on the edge the whole game. That they were just kind of lucky to still be in it for as long as they were, and then after Laine scored, it was pretty much just a drubbing, the same as in Game 2. Like, the Jets just totally had taken the game. The Wild were just kind of going through the motions, is what it really was like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. And then there was just kind of this weird narrative after Game 1 where everyone was getting on Dubnyk again, or maybe that was just Twitter overreacting, or maybe I just follow too many radio personalities in this town. But I didn't have any problem with Devin Dubnyk in Game 1, and in fact, I'll go as far to say that probably should have been a 6-2 kind of a game, if not for Devin Dubnyk.
Yeah, this is the best we've seen from Devin Dubnyk, like maybe in his entire career with the Wild. Like we've never seen this from him in the playoffs ever, and it's totally unfair that anyone would say that his performance in Game 1 was the reason they lost that game. I mean, that like fluke shot from the point, like we've seen that type of crap all year where it glances off a defenseman and it just takes a funny hop and it beats him. You know, like I don't think there's many goalies in the league that are going to be able to stop shots like that. So I think Devin Dubnyk is probably the reason. Like if the Wild go on to win this series, I think Devin Dubnyk is for sure going to be the reason why.
Yeah, no, and we talked about this previewing the series last week with Tom, and Devin Dubnyk has to basically steal games in order for the Wild to win this series. And I think he's, done everything but. I think he's played well, but he's played just below that completely standing on his head, stealing a playoff game level. And for him to be criticized for not single-handedly winning the hockey game when your team is getting absolutely throttled, in front of you on the ice is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, he was getting zero help in front of him at certain points in that first game. I mean, especially in the third period, it was just like they were just piling on the shots and the shot attempts, and I mean, the Wild are pretty lucky that they only gave up 3 goals in that game.
Right.
And it wasn't until, it was kind of getting mid to late in the third and, the Wild defense couldn't get a pass out of the defensive zone to save their lives, and they were just really leaning on the throw it off the glass, hope somebody in a white jersey gets it kind of a mode, which was not working at all. And that was really the first time in the game, I guess, which I thought was a pretty decent thing to not notice. But that was the first time really in the game that I thought this is where the Wild really missed Suter, because his collected, calm presence back there would have probably stopped maybe a few of those shots, and maybe the Wild could have gotten a chance or two out of that. But, we'll never know. That's really where I looked and I said, that's where you missed Ryan Suter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the transition game is, definitely the biggest thing that I noticed is in the first 2 games, especially in Winnipeg. I mean, as you said, they could not get out of their own zone. There was no transition game to be had almost whatsoever. Like it was an incredibly rare feat that they were completing stretch passes. And that's even with guys, who are actually somewhat good at it, like especially Jared Spurgeon, and we've seen Dumba and Brodin succeed at it, but even they weren't able to pull that off in the first 2 games of the series. So, yeah, I think absolutely, that's where you see losing Suter is basically changing the series from, something where you might take a 50-50 shot at to something where the Wild looked like they didn't belong on the ice for the first 2 games.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, especially like you said, especially in the first 2 games, that the transition game was just like non-existent. I mean, maybe they just kind of got like their brains shot out to the point where they were just kind of going through the motions of just trying to like survive and relieve every bit of pressure that they felt. But I mean, Ryan Suter we've always seen is kind of if he gets the puck, he's going to make a quick pass to the open guy, and they're moving the puck back the other way. And we just did not see that at all from any really of the defensemen in that first game or the second game. And, it's no doubt that Ryan Suter is one of the best person on the Wild in that regard.
So what, in your mind, was more difficult? The Wild trying to get the puck through the neutral zone in games 1 and 2, or trying to navigate your car on the Minnesota roads Saturday night?
I think the Wild probably had a harder time than me. I actually went out and drove on Saturday, and I didn't really have too much of an issue. But I mean, it just seemed like as soon as they would get to the blue line, they would just kind of put it right off the glass, and it would kind of flutter down to the opposite blue line. And if there was a Wild player there, that's great. If there's not, then hey, whatever, I guess. Like they were fine with settling with that. They'd do a change and, do the same thing right over again.
Yeah, I think they were getting pinned in their zone so much that there was just no transition to be had, because as soon as the defender got the puck, they were, just kind of looking to throw it out of it was hand grenade hockey. They were just throwing the puck at will out to the neutral zone, just hoping that they had enough time to get a change, let alone generate any kind of offense.
When I kind of alluded to this on our post-game recap, where I said the Wild's fourth line of Foligno, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Daniel Winnick was their best line. And then when you really think about it, that line probably never touched the ice in the last 10 minutes of the hockey game, and that was really the only line in Game 1 that was getting any kind of decent looks.
Well, yeah, and wasn't it also like Suter got or not Suter, I'm sorry, Suter. Koivu played like almost the last like 2.5 minutes or something, I think. So yeah, you definitely have to question the way that was handled. I mean, I don't think we didn't see Stahl taking faceoffs. We just saw Koivu taking faceoffs like for 2 minutes straight while the Jets just iced it. And we've seen this from Koivu all year, really. I mean, he is an outstanding defender. I'll never take that part away from him. But his lines, no matter who you put with him, have just been a black hole for offense. That's true. I mean, I kind of get it that you got to put him out there in that situation, but I just don't think I don't ever have high expectations when I see that kind of thing.
When I didn't notice this until after the game, but Mikko Koivu was only like 42% in the faceoff dot in Game 1. I'm kind of half and half on this. Like, I don't necessarily blame Boudreau for throwing your best faceoff guy, who's typically at like a 55-54% faceoff guy all year, back out there. But, like Derek said, he was out there for the last 2.5 minutes, couldn't win a draw to save his life, and you're throwing a line out there that's typically been a black hole this year. So I can kind of understand the rationale, but then again, like, it's a playoff game. You got to be a little more drastic with your thinking. I guess when we're talking about Bruce Boudreau and playoff logic, that's probably a whole different thing.
Yeah, and I mean, if we're going to be arguing about face-offs, I don't think we're going to get anywhere productive anytime soon.
No, probably not.
Yeah.
So that was Game 1, and the general message from the Wild after the game was, need that one back. Didn't play our best. Got to get back at it in Game 2, and in Game 2 had a more of a bug on a windshield kind of approach, as the Jets really from start to end just throttled the Wild, and pretty much picking up where they left off in the third period of Game 1 as they win 4-1, and honestly, again, if not for Devin Dubnyk, this probably could have been 7-8-1. And, really the last, I think, 2 goals for Dubnyk, he just kind of threw his hands up and was like, all right, like, nobody else is going to bail me out of this, so I just don't care.
Yeah, I think that it was just as ugly for him in the second game as it was the first, and not much that even the goals that he allowed, I don't think were particularly awful. I think that the Jets have some very, very skilled offensive players, and they're out shooting the Wild at almost a 3-1 margin, like that kind of thing's going to happen.
It was just. From the Wild kind of hung with them through the first period. I thought they played fine, and then it was just like Winnipeg hit a switch, and it was like the Wild could not touch them. They couldn't get the puck. They couldn't transition. They had turnovers. They couldn't complete passes. Like, it was just like, if the Wild played like that for 82 games in the regular season, I don't think we would see, I don't think they would win a game. So for the fact that they only gave up, I think they only gave up one 5-on-5 goal in the second period when they were outshot, out attempted by plus 20 or plus 30, something like that. Dubnyk was, again, awesome in this game, and I don't put any blame on him for the loss of this.
Was there any kind of good takeaway besides Dubnyk was good from game 2? Because I kind of sat there and I thought about it after the game, and I pretty much was, no. I had none.
I honestly don't think there was a good takeaway. Zucker played almost as bad as I maybe have ever seen him play. That Tyler Myers game, or the Tyler Myers play where he just kind of gets walked all the way down and then just snipes it past Dubnyk. I mean, that's some of the worst defense I've ever seen from Jason Zucker, and his offense is non-existent at the same time. So it was just a lot of underwhelming performances from every single forward. And maybe the one somewhat positive I thought was that Susie was better than he was in game 1. Given the fact that he had, clear. What was that?
I said it wasn't necessarily a high bar to clear, but yeah, I thought he did get better.
No, definitely not. I mean, he had a horrible game in game 1, but it was nice to see that he was able to bounce back from that and play at a competent level again, I guess. Yeah, but other than that, other than Dubnyk's play, I really don't think there's anything that the Wild or fans should take away from it. I think that's one of those, they always talk about those burn the tape games, and I think that's definitely one of them.
Yeah, it was definitely a burn the tape game, but that game. If that game doesn't serve as a motivator for you for the next game, for game 3, then you really need to check your pulse. I don't want to give a whole lot of credence to the fights at the end of the game and all that kind of shenanigans, but if that game isn't just the splash of cold water, slap in the face to the Wild that they needed to change, what they were doing, and they needed to change the way they were playing, nothing was going to be. So, that's the only thing that you can take out of that game, is that it, without the slap in the face that was that game, every game's going to end up like game 1, where they just get beat and they kind of, are somewhat content with it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty embarrassing game to watch. I think it was probably pretty humiliating for all the players involved, and I think kind of especially with the way that the media has been covering this from the start is kind of just Winnipeg's going to roll over them, and I feel like the Wild kind of came into it as kind of being a little bit cutesy and being Boudreau's quote of it was an honor to be invited, trying to downplay it, and then you come out and have a game like this where you just get steamrolled for 55 minutes or something. If that doesn't get you fired up for the next game, then I don't think you have a future in hockey.
Right.
And I guess before we move to the next game, you mentioned one of the more embarrassing games in recent memory, and I'm pretty much in agreement with it. I think really the cherry on top has been kind of mentioned, the extracurricular activities we saw at the end of the game that I felt could have been done without. Daniel Winnick pummeled some poor kid into the ice, and
that kid got fed his lunch.
Yeah, he did.
I mean, I'll just say, don't anger Daniel Winnick, but my goodness, that was, I just felt that was unnecessary. And it kind of went back to 2 weeks ago in the Dallas game when Hitchcock threw his garbage players out onto the ice like Roussel at the end of the game, and then they obviously had all that extra stuff at the end that was totally unnecessary. But I don't know. Some people do find some validity to that, and you even had Bruce Boudreau after the game saying, "Well, they're sending a message for the next game," and I hope the message was something different than, we needed to be more tough. I don't know.
I mean, I was watching the Sportsnet broadcast for that game, and just kind of the whole time they're just talking about the Wild's focus on being physical, And I mean, if that's what the Wild are truly focusing on, then they've like completely lost their way. Like, this is a team that is not known for being like the big physical, going to run players type of team. So I don't know if whatever happened at the end of that game serves any purpose as far as like instilling your physicality going forward. I mean, if you're the Jets and this team is trying to run you at the end of the game that you just smoked them, I mean, I think you're just kind of laughing when you're back in the locker room. Like, we're inside of these guys' heads. If that's the type of thing that they have to resort to is, starting a brawl with 10 seconds left, that's as low as it gets, if you ask me.
I thought it was very similar to when 2015 when the Wild played the Blues the first time. And the Blues were kind of known as this big, bruising, physical team. And what the Wild did so good in that series was they didn't play into that. They didn't play into the physicality. They didn't play into the Steve Ott games. And they just played their game, and they won. And through the first two games, you're kind of looking at I feel like the Wild are trying to be too physical. They're getting too far away from their game, and it showed.
Yeah, and we've seen the same thing from the Wild against Colorado in the recent years. Maybe not this season, but before, when Colorado would just kind of run around like a bunch of jackasses and try to hit everything. Wild they just didn't play that game, and they won almost every matchup.
We can, too, quickly put that one in the garbage and move right on ahead to Game 3, where the Minnesota Wild quickly traveled back home after Game 2 Friday night. They made the wise decision to do so. And then 16-odd inches of snow dumped on the Twin Cities on Saturday, preventing the Winnipeg Jets from making it to the Twin Cities until Sunday morning. But obviously, as I kind of alluded to on our pregame video, don't put too much, Don't put too much emphasis on that. Like, the Jets are going to be just fine. It's only an hour flight. Let's be real. So,
yeah. I bet they found a lovely bed and breakfast up in Duluth.
I think they sat on a plane forever and then finally went back to Winnipeg. I don't think they even experienced any of that city.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
that's too bad. It's lovely.
They should have stayed in Duluth.
Yeah.
As somebody said on Twitter, they should have just stayed there and played the best hockey team in the state.
Yeah, would have been an interesting matchup.
At that time, that was a good shots fired, but
it was. After Game 2, I can't really disagree.
Yeah. So Game 3, you couldn't have asked for really a better game from the Minnesota Wild in a game that they had to win, because let's be honest, you're not winning 4 in a row against the Jets. But the Wild do just about everything right except maybe stay out of the penalty box in the first half of the hockey game. They win 6-2. They have 6 different goal scorers. Granlund, Parise, Dumba, Stahl, Jordan Greenway's first NHL goal, Marcus Foligno. The offense is finally ignited after the reuniting of the Zucker-Stahl-Granlund line, which had been very good in a short burst early on this year. Now the Wild are only down 2-1 in the series in a big home game on Tuesday, but after this game, you're kind of reminded, hey, the Wild are actually not bad, but your thoughts just kind of go back, well, they got to win one at Winnipeg at some point then if they're going to do this at home.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about maybe staying out of the penalty box, but do you guys agree that those first 2 calls were some of the most ticky-tack that we've ever seen?
Yeah. The Matt Cullen slashing call was
those
bad.
are the type of slashing calls that they were calling at the beginning of the year when they were trying to emphasize no more of this hand-checking stuff. And then it kind of disappeared, or it didn't really seem like players stopped doing it because guys like Parise have been he never stopped doing it. And now, in the most pivotal game of this series so far, they come out and call the first 2 that they see. I just feel like that was not a great way to get the game started, and it eventually resulted in a bad power play goal against the Wild. So, I really hope that we're not going to see that trend continue going forward, and those penalties are going to continue to get called. But I guess that's the one thing that they did do poorly. And then the Wild took some other penalties, like some tripping penalties and some holdings, where like the forechecker just kind of gets so gung ho on catching the guy with the puck that he just like chases him down at any cost. And, the guy will be like going into a corner. I think we saw this from Parisi on Wheeler tonight. And, just you touch the stick against that guy's feet and he's going down. And that's what happened. And we saw another similar thing from Charlie Coyle where he like chases a guy all the way into the neutral zone. Like the guy's got him beat. I mean, Coyle's not going to get around in front of him to stop the puck carrier. And he takes a penalty like that. So we definitely need to cut down on penalties like that. But overall, this game was pretty clean for the Wild.
Yeah, I think with the penalty thing, like I think the refs made it a point of emphasis, obviously, because they kept calling really ticky-tack stuff basically until the game was out of hand. Like they called everything, and you've got a post-whistle scrum where a bunch of guys shove each other. That happens at every whistle at every NHL game. Yeah. And they saddled Dumbo with a roughing minor for it. And so I think that I think as much as they can, the refs were sending a message after the shenanigans late in game 2. And so the Wild, maybe kind of did that because they were the ones that obviously wanted to show at the end of game 2 that they were still, still motivated and they were rewarded by having hypersensitive refs for game 3.
Yeah.
The thing I pointed out before the game was, that Stahl line was the line that had to get going. You had Stahl, you had Zucker, you had Granlund, and together, between the three of them, they had 1 point in the first 2 games, and these three were big drivers of offense for Minnesota all season, and they had pretty much laid a goose egg in 2 games, and I know the Stahl line previously was, getting pretty good matchups, or not good matchups for them, but they were getting matched up against like the Wheeler-Scheifele line. That was not favorable for them at all. And in Game 3, they were obviously able to control the matchups a little bit more, and obviously the getting Zucker, Granlund, Stahl on the line, it just really kind of sparked the Wild, and you hope that they can, at some way, figure out how to score on the road when they really need it.
Well, that's what we've seen out of this team all season, right? Is that when they can dictate matchups, they're pretty good because they are a good enough team. They are a talented enough team that when they get a favorable matchup, they can take advantage of it. But as we've seen, again, on the road all season long, they're not able to dictate the matchups as much, and their lack of depth is exposed. So, certainly not the most shocking thing in the world. They were able to win. I think it was shocking how dominant they looked in Game 3, but it was kind of like a flip a coin thing if they were going to come back and win Game 3 in an emotional fashion, or if they were just if Winnipeg was going to kind of continue to throttle them.
Yeah, I felt like right when they got that power play goal at the start, like if they don't score that goal, I think this game is like a totally different story, and it could definitely end with heartbreak instead of what we got tonight. But that was a huge goal. The Granlund, Granlund just has these spurts where he kind of goes on where he just gets like out hit he just gets matched up against guys that are more physical or guys that are willing to do everything to hit him to take away his ability to carry the puck. And tonight he was able, for whatever reason, I don't know how or what switch he needs to pull, but he was getting by guys. He was dancing around. He just was able to hold on to the puck. And when he holds on to the puck, he can make almost anything happen. I mean, he's the most gifted player in that regard on this team. And we saw it result in the Stahl goal. He was, passing all around on the power play. He got the power play goal. So, I mean, the offense is really driving through Granlund right now. And it really depends on if he can get room to skate. And if he can find that space, then he's going to create a lot of offense, and the Wild need to do a much better job of doing that. I think I don't know if it's something that Granlund is doing individually or if the Wild are game planning for. But whatever it is, I mean, get that man the puck in some space, and you're going to score goals.
I found a nice little bit of irony that Stahl goal where he just kind of made that spinorama pass to get the puck to Stahl was done with Dustin Byfuglien right up on him, and just burning Byfuglien there was a nice thing to see, I gotta admit.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about matchups in the first couple games and the Wild forwards not getting the matchups that they want, and you know the Stahl goal came against Blake Wheeler and Mark Scheifele, so like that's the matchup that the Jets would most likely look for on the road, and you know the Wild shut it down.
You know, if it wasn't for the, you know, like you said, the goal at the beginning that, you know, wasn't exactly the greatest goal to allow from Dubnyk, you know, the Wild hold that line, you know, up the score sheet tonight, and you know that's another solid thing. And you kind of go back to matchups again. You know, the Wheeler line was, you know, relatively ineffective after that, and you know, Patrick Laine, I don't really recall hearing his name called in Game 3. That is a definite plus for the Minnesota Wild, who saw firsthand what he can do in Game 1 when he gets the puck and he gets a little bit of space in the offensive zone, and that's good night. So you have to be pleased with how they did, you know, defensively and how they used their matchups, but and again, it kind of comes back to probably getting a little too ahead of myself, but they got to figure this out on the road when they're not getting the matchups.
I was just going to talk about Patrick Laine some more. Yeah, I really don't think I heard his name at all. I mean, he had one shot on goal, and I feel like even in the first two games, he wasn't a huge factor. You know, it's not like the Wild got lit up by Laine and Scheifele and Wheeler. I know Stastny got a goal, but you know, the Wild are getting beat by Tyler Myers, and Joe Morrow. Like, those are the types of guys that we've seen score against the Wild all year. I mean, how many games have we watched during the regular season where, you know, Joe Schmo gets his, like, third ever NHL goal? So I feel like the Wild always do a really good job of shutting down the superstars. But then the problem with the Jets is that they're so deep that leaves you with guys like Nikolai Ehlers and, previously Matthew Perreault. We'll see if he ever comes back, but you know, I feel like the Wild have done a really, really good job of shutting down the big Jets scoring offense so far.
Yeah. How bad is Patrick Laine's beard?
Oof.
It's the worst ever.
It's not good.
He looks like a leprechaun. I don't understand what look he's going for. He looks like the leprechaun, the horror movie Leprechaun from the 90s. I don't know what he's going for there. Like, did he shave it into that shape? Because why would you do that?
Like, I just want to know what his, like, end goal with this is. Like, what is in his mind? Like, what is it going to look like when it's done and, like, perfect, you know? Because I don't see it. Like, I don't care how many years you let that thing go. I don't see it.
I was going to say, I think we've given Sidney Crosby a fair amount of flack for his playoff beard terribleness, but Laine is able to grow a full beard and still somehow looks worse than Sidney Crosby with a beard.
That's a feat unto itself.
It is.
And I think the really scary thing is he enjoys this. Like, he knows everyone thinks it looks terrible, and he takes pride in the fact that everyone thinks it looks terrible.
Maybe that's his whole goal in the whole thing is, like, it's just like a hilarious prank on, like, all of humankind that we have to look at that thing.
Yeah.
So gross.
I mean, now we, you know, obviously recapping Game 3 here, I guess the other thing I had was, you know, that was a really shaky start for Devan Dubnyk, and it kind of looked like he was about to serve up a stinker after two incredible games, but he really kind of collected himself after the second goal. He wasn't tested a whole lot, but he still made some big saves in there, and you know, I know how difficult it is for goaltenders to make a blocker save, but it's you had to be pleased with how he finished the game, especially considering where he started the game from.
Yeah, and the first goal, I mean, it was pretty gross. It was just him caught cheating. Like, it wasn't.
Yeah.
I don't even know that it was that fluky. Like, people like to call it the typical Dubnyk fluky goal. Like, it was fluky in that it deflected off of Brodin, but he just got caught cheating. Like, it was a pass, and so he anticipated the pass, and then the pass ended up going into his skate and into the net. So, I mean, you have to like what you see that game could have been much different had he allowed one of the better the hard saves that he made there in the second period. If he would have allowed one of those and allowed him to get back more than he did when it was 3-2, that could have been a totally different game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just, as soon as I saw that goal, I thought, oh my God, we get 2 good games of goaltending out of Dubnyk, can't capitalize, and then he's going to come out and lay an egg, and it's, the Wild are going to play awesome and lose. But happily, that was not the case. And he also got kind of stung on that, on the Bufflin slap shot.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what that's going to look like going forward. Hopefully that was just a minor temporary, got the wind knocked out of him type of thing. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was another great game from him.
Yeah, you hope it is just a stinger, knock the wind out of him, and he'll be good tomorrow. Otherwise, Ben's going to really sweat it out on the West Coast, thinking of Alex Stalock getting into a playoff game.
No, I'm home for the next week, so I don't have to. Luckily, I don't have to get off of work at 4 p.m. just to watch Stalock play in the playoffs.
That's right. I knew that. You need to send me an advanced copy of your schedule. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. The Wild now down 2-1 in this series, and obviously that's not ideal, but considering how they played in the first 2 games, that seems, almost like a real bonus. And so, looking ahead to Game 4 and, beyond, what are we realistically looking for from the Wild here? Because, I mean, they got Game 4 on Tuesday at home, and then they go back to dreaded Winnipeg for Game 5 on Friday at the very least. And the Jets are the best home team in the NHL, and they've won, I believe it's now 11 in a row at home going back to February 27th. And, as much as we love to hear the Wild are a good home team, the Jets are an even better home team.
Yeah, I mean, I really just the Wild just have to get their 5-on-5 offense going. I mean, it's nice that they got some help from the power play tonight, but you definitely cannot count on that going forward. You need to create at the strength that happens the most often, and that's 5-on-5, and they just did not do that at all in Winnipeg. I mean, we saw almost no offensive zone time. The couple times that they scored were crap rebounds or on the rush with the one Parisi plays. So, I mean, they need to figure out a way to generate some sustained offensive pressure. They need to retrieve pucks when they dump them in and not just use that as a and the easy way out. And if they can do that, I think the Wild have all the tools to stay in this series. They definitely have all the tools. They just need to get the offense going again. And if Dubnyk keeps playing this way, I mean, they're in the series. They definitely are.
Yeah, I think Game 4, as you see in almost any series, Game 4 is just so pivotal. If they lose Game 4, the series is over, right? It's basically academic at that point. But if they win Game 4, I mean, it's 2-2, and it's not like the series is guaranteed to go 7 at that point, but it means everything. Game 4 is always the linchpin of the entire series. And to Derek's point, I mean, Dubnyk has to be, like we talked about, Dubnyk has to be absolutely on fire still. He has to continue this level of play and possibly even take it up a notch, because they're going to have to win a game in Winnipeg if they want to win this series. And they're not winning a game in Winnipeg without Devan Dubnyk, 100% stealing the game and standing on his head.
Something else that's really kind of maybe stuck out to me in a good way from the first, maybe not just Game 3, but the first 3 games in general is Matt Dumba has been very good as the de facto number one defenseman on the team now, with Ryan Suter out and Jared Spurgeon playing very less than 100%. And he played 30 minutes in the first two games, and then here in game three, he only played 23 and a half minutes, and that probably had more to do with the fact that the game was over in the third period, so the rest of the defense was getting breaks. But you really have to be pleased with Matt Dumba and Jonas Brodin as well as that top pair, and how they've played and having to step up and take these bigger minutes due to injuries.
Yeah, for sure. And I think another thing that is really going to be key going forward is that, like, tonight we finally saw what happens when you shoot a bunch of pucks at Connor Hellebuck. Like, they go in. They brought it up again on the broadcast tonight on USA Network that, like, Hellebuck is in the Vezina conversation, and I'm just not buying it. I just don't. He had a great year. Do not get me wrong, but we just haven't seen anything from him to prove that it's for real yet, and especially not in the playoffs. So if you can get some pucks on this guy, like in game two, he saw like how many shots in the last two periods, like 4 or something. Like,
right.
No wonder the guy looks good. He doesn't have to stop anything. So, throw some shots at the guy and see what happens.
As Mike Greenlay will say in either overtime or any playoff run, any shot is a good shot.
That's
probably the one Greenlay thing where I agree with him.
Yeah. And can we go back to like the Jets' home record for just a second? So they've won since March 15th. They've only lost one game at home in the regular season. But if you look, 5 of those games are in overtime or a shootout, which 3-on-3 overtime does not exist in the playoffs. Shootouts obviously don't exist. One win is against Chicago, non-playoff team. Dallas, non-playoff team. They beat Calgary, non-playoff team, and Chicago again. So, it's been throughout the year. Sure, it's been good, but they have not been playing against top-tested playoffs in full-length games.
Oh, that's fair. It was on the media guide for Game 2 when I saw it, and it was obviously written by the Jets staff, so there wasn't who they beat. So that does give me a little more optimism about maybe stealing one on the road.
Yeah, I think definitely there to be had. It's there. Like I said, the Wild have every tool to stay in this series and do something. They just have to execute.
Yeah, I think if it's anything like Game 2, I worry about that being a psychological block for them now, where Game 2 gave them a little bit of PTSD when they go back to Winnipeg for Game 5. I legitimately worry about that, because there was such a drubbing that it's either that or they have to use it as motivation like they did tonight. But you've got to use that Game 2 as they need to play a completely different game than they played in the first 2 games, really, to have any chance of winning it in Winnipeg.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things that helped them win tonight was, they didn't really have a backup plan. They gave up the early goal, and it just seemed like, in Winnipeg when they would give up a goal, it kind of felt like it was instant panic almost. Okay, we really, that's a huge goal to give up. And they just kind of seemed a little down on themselves. And tonight, it just felt like they didn't give themselves that option. It was just all right, screw it. Let's go out there. Let's play fast and try to generate some offense. And they did that. So I think if whatever they can do to keep that mentality going forward is what they're going to have to do.
Yeah. No, I'm being filled with optimism here. I don't quite know what to do with myself.
Run away, Giles. Run away.
And the other point I was going to bring up after Dumba was I also thought Nick Seeler has had a very good, he had a really good Game 3, and I thought he hasn't been overly bad. In fact, I think he's been pretty good in the series as well. And this is a guy who has less than 30 games of NHL experience, and man, what a gem he's kind of turned out to be here, especially considering all the injuries.
Yeah, he's been awesome. Like I don't think there's been a wild player this season that's kind of surprised me more as, Nick Seeler. He just kind of seems like one of those like throwaway draft picks, like, draft the kid that goes to school close because he's easy to scout, he's easy to keep tabs on, and, turns out he can actually play hockey.
Yeah, no, he's been, a really like a revelation of a find, and it's good because Suter obviously was such a big part of this team, but I don't know, it kind of pains me because it's like they had maybe more defensive depth than they thought they did when they made the moves they made this past summer. So it's good, don't get me wrong, but at the same time it's like, man, had they known what they would have in Seeler, and we even liked what we've seen a little bit out of Susie, off and on, and I don't know, it gives me like that double-edged sword feel.
And then on the maybe kind of the flip side of the up and down scale here, Niederreiter, he's just had a not overly great first 3 games, and my mind's kind of drifting to, how healthy is he, because he's really been playing on a bad leg all year, and that's kind of concerning at this point.
Yeah, obviously it's hard to ignore that, but I really do think it's still probably something to do with the injuries. Like, this is just not something that we've ever seen from Nino in his career, is, playing like this. And it's, I don't really feel like he's just playing that badly. I just think he's like kind of a passenger, and he just doesn't, he is probably better suited to like get more time on the power play. I don't know what I'm trying to say exactly, I guess, but like, he just seems a little bit of a passenger at 5-on-5, but if you can get him on the power play and get him in that slot area where he's looking for deflections, I think that's where he can be the most useful when he's in this state, if he is in fact injured. So, it's not, they don't have options for other forwards, so it's not like he's coming out. So, he has to dig deep and try to provide a little bit more, but I'm not going to go and blame the guy and say he's he's soft or he's mentally not tough. So I think it's just a tough season for him so far.
I think it's just a general PSA for this time of year when we get into the playoffs, and nobody really seems to leave the lineup with injuries like you would normally see over the same period of time in the regular season. Yep. And you don't know if a player is hurt or not. And then, when the run ends, you hear such and such is going to have surgery tomorrow to fix blah, blah, blah. And then you go, oh, that makes up for why he was not good in the playoffs. Like last year, Mikael Granlund got ripped in the playoffs for 5 games because he did nothing. And then it was revealed afterwards that he was playing with a broken hand. So that made entirely plausible sense that he was not playing good because his hand was broken.
Or the Colorado season, the year where the Wild played Colorado in the playoffs, when Charlie Coyle was playing with 2 separated shoulders. These guys go through a lot, and it's near impossible to know who's healthy and who's not. And I think it's probably safe to assume that almost nobody is healthy or 100%.
Yeah, so I guess more than anything from this is just please consider that aspect before you go rip a player for not trying in the playoffs.
Especially a guy like Niederreiter, who has like a known injury that's been nagging him for a long time.
Right. And a guy like Niederreiter who seems to draw the ire of the writers sometimes when he goes missing for a few games. So just a PSA for everyone.
I'm big on like just the practice of not using air quotes here, calling out any particular player for any particular stretch of time. Like, I don't understand why that's so much of a thing. It's not really so much of a thing for, us blogger folks, or even some of the mainstream media, but like there's some people in media and especially the fans on social media, like they just have this insatiable need to point out when players are not playing well. And it's just like, well, you have it's like you have no idea what's going on here. Like it's such a ridiculous notion to me that like you have to point out a player, playing below your expectations. Whether that's even true or not too is another thing. Like a lot of people were saying that about Dumba tonight. It's like, I think he had a fine game, and it just, I don't understand the practice at all.
Wait, were people saying Dumba had a bad game tonight?
Oh yeah, no, I saw it. I saw people with negative
those people
Dumba
are out
comments. I mean, it was about the penalties early on a little bit, but it was just like, it was the same thing where people just, as soon as they get this whiff of Dumba doing something wrong, they attack like rabid dogs. So
yeah, it's really easy to ignore all of the positive things when like one bigger bad thing happens, and for me, Dumba is like on the good list for quite a while from all of the positives that he's brought, and he's taken so much crap this year from people.
Right.
I mean, the guy's a good defensive player. Like going into this season was kind of like everybody's, I feel like, deciding season with Dumba. Like, are the Wild going to keep him? There's rumors that they've been trying to trade him the past couple seasons. And for me personally, this season is the one that cemented, like, yeah, this is a guy that you should keep.
Right.
Yep. No, and it feels like he just had, he had that bad October, and nobody's going to deny that his first month of the year was bad. But, when you watch the games as closely as the three of us do, you can really see the improvements in his game and the strides he's taken. And, he's stepped into essentially the number one defenseman role here since Suter went down, and he's done a very good job. There's been very little complaints on my end, but it just goes back to it. People are always going to find something wrong when they're just looking for it. So that's if you can't appreciate Matt Dumba, I don't know. I can't help. It's like that Twitter meme that went around last week for a day. If you don't love me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best.
Yep.
So, yeah, exactly.
There you go. I guess here, what do we think happens now here in the next week? I mean, Ben and I really haven't talked about when we're going to record next, but at least we're going to get a Game 4 and a Game 5 before we record, and depending on how the chips fall, there could be a Game 6. So I guess what do you guys think is going to happen here in the next week?
That is a heavy question, Giles.
I ask the hard-hitting questions here.
Yeah, you really do. So, I mean, obviously, if the Wild play like they played tonight, they can win Game 4. So I really think the big focus for the Wild needs to be on the games back in Winnipeg. Like, they need to win one on the road, and I don't think you can wait until Game 7 where you pull that out of your ass. Like, it's got to be, if you really want to make some noise and put the pressure on the Jets, you need to show up and play on Thursday this week and win at home. Well, first of all, you have to win on Thursday, and I think that the Wild are definitely capable of that. We saw it tonight. Like, this, if Dubnyk plays the way he's been playing, I'll keep saying it, he is the key to this right now. And if he keeps playing the way that he's been playing and he's not letting in these fluky goals where he looks unfocused, the Wild have a shot.
Yeah, I'm not quite as optimistic, I guess. It's just, it feels like it follows the script that we've seen before, where they play. I mean, what are they in Game 3s? Like 6-1 or something like that. I think they cited. And they're incredible in Game 3s, where they've got all this emotion. They're coming back home. They're such a great team at home. Yada yada yada. And then I just fear that we'll see them play well again on Tuesday night in Game 4. but somehow find a way to lose. Whether it's a stanchion goal, whether it's a fluky bounce, or whether it's like in the Dallas series when they actually scored a game time goal but it didn't count for some reason. I greatly fear. I have so much leftover PTSD from this team in the playoffs. I greatly fear that happening in Game 4. And then I think, obviously if it's 3-1 at that point, it's kind of over and done with. But I worry about that. That's my concern for this team, is like saying like, hey, we're good at home. We can beat these guys at home. And then, if they don't get it done at home, they're done.
The Wild have been it's been such a weird season, and it's just so hard to like try to grasp of like what could happen. But seeing how they did tonight, how they still fell down 1-0, and they came back, and to coin the Dan Myers phrase, they were resilient, and they steamrolled the Jets after that first goal, which was fluky, and that gives me hope that they can do the same in Game 4. And as we said, Dubnyk has to be sharp again, because the Jets will get their chances. But if they win Game 4 and they just have some confidence, maybe they can win that Game 5. They lost Game 1, that game they should have had, and maybe they learned from that somehow. I don't know. All of a sudden, I'm filled with this hope and optimism. So I think maybe they win the next 2 games. Hot take. You just kind of think of all the things we kind of talked about here, and especially how when we were talking about matchups and how like Wheeler, Scheifele, Laine, they've scored, but not a lot, and it's just kind of been some fluky players / goals that have kind of decided these games so far. So I'd like to think that maybe kind of balances out in Game 5 if the series is even, and the Wild are coming back to St. Paul next Sunday with a 3-2 lead. So there you go.
Yeah, one thing we haven't seen is like a legitimately good hockey game, like through and through, like a close game that's competitive, like both teams playing well. I mean, we've just seen kind of like, first game Wild kind of hang in there, then they get killed. Second game they just get killed the whole way, and then tonight like Jets kind of hung in there for a while, and then they got killed. So maybe eventually we'll get a decent hockey game to watch. So I think throughout the entire season, the Wild have been one of the best defending teams in the league, at least in terms of expected goals. So now that they're actually getting like good goaltending, I just think it's too easy to discredit them and say that that they can't shut down this Jets offense. When we've seen them all year been able to shut down, every offense in the NHL. Like they have every tool.
All right. Very quickly, on to the Bruce Boudreau quote of the week.
Hi, this is Bruce Boudreau. I don't see how in Toronto that they're calling it, unless it's a guy they just pulled in off the street that hasn't seen hockey before. If I were the fans, I'd be booing even more, because that, they pay good money for this.
If you want it, don't just think you want it. Go out and f***ing want it.
The quote of the week was something that Derek alluded to very early on in the show. As he mentioned before the series started, and I believe this was on Tuesday, or maybe it was Wednesday. Yeah, it was Wednesday. My bad. Bruce Boudreau was asked if he was aware of the underdog status that really just about any hockey media had put on the Minnesota Wild, and pretty much anyone had picked the Jets to win. So he was asked about this, and he said, "You'd have to be blind not to see it, especially on Canadian TV everywhere." Obviously, the Wild were staying in Winnipeg, so he full-on got that. And then he says, Quote, "But we're here. We're going to play this game. I'm glad we're invited to play, so we'll give it our best shot."
Yeah, I like the snarky tone that he took. But I don't know. I think Derek alluded to it earlier. It's like, it's like that's nice that you feel like you're an underdog and stuff. But I don't know. I'd like to almost to see a little bit more fire about it. Maybe like act like you're a little irritated that everyone's writing you off.
Yeah, I especially like that quote because it reminds me of, I think it was a preseason game against the Jets.
Yeah, a few years ago.
Yeah, 2 or 3 years ago when I think it was probably still Paul Maurice who said, it was just an honor to be in the same building as the Wild. And that is honestly one of my all-time favorite sports media quotes ever. It's just so funny to me because it's just this meaningless preseason game. The Wild just spanked them 8 goals or something.
I think it was 7-1.
So yeah, so that gave me some nice nostalgia to that quote, which is one of my all-time favorites.
That was an amazing quote.
I love to make that reference when I can, but only 3 people get it.
Oh, so yeah. That's a small audience. That is narrowcasting at its finest.
Yeah. So, yeah, and going back to Boudreau, we talk about the underdog. This is a new thing for him. This is what really fascinated me about the series was Bruce Boudreau's never been an underdog. He's always been the favorite. And, you think of how long he's coached in the league, all the accolades he has. He's never been the underdog going into a first-round series like this. And, I guess this is another learning experience for him, too. So maybe that's another reason why I have optimism for Game 5 is he'll figure it out.
Yeah, but I don't really buy they're kind of trying to play it off as there's no pressure on us. The fans and the media and the people that follow this team still have expectations of you. The fans that don't follow it super closely, they are still expecting you to win. So to come out and be try to use that as if they lose in 5 games, be we weren't supposed to win. That's not going to fly for a lot of people. A lot of people are still going to be pissed. So
yeah,
take some pride in it and do what we saw tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's plenty. I don't get how he doesn't feel any pressure. Your boss, Chuck Fletcher, his job is probably on the line here
for sure.
We don't know that for a fact, and Russo seems to think that quite possibly Chuck is getting extended anyway. But it's not out of the realm of possibility that Chuck Fletcher gets canned if the Wild don't at least have a good showing. We talked about this last week, but at least don't have a good showing in this series. So I don't know. I don't know how you don't feel the pressure there.
And at the end of the day, it's still hockey. I mean, I don't care that the Wild, the Jets are supposed to cream the Wild and everybody picks them in, 5 games. It's still hockey. Anything can happen. We saw it tonight. One weird goal one way, and that's all it takes. So I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll see. Yeah. We will see. It should be exciting.
Yes, it should. That can probably wrap it up for us, I guess. Since we had to move our locale from unnamed bar and grill setting to internet setting because of the still snowy weather. Ben doesn't get to watch me eat coleslaw, so it has to be tabled for a new week.
What a shame.
Really is.
So I guess before we go, any final thoughts?
My final thought would be follow me on Twitter at State of Stats. Follow all my work at The Athletic Minnesota. There's 1 million promo codes. I didn't look one up before I came on, which I'm really realizing now is probably not a great strategy. But just go to Russo's Twitter. You'll find a discount code if you want to get in on The Athletic for a discounted rate. There's a ton of great writers there right now. Hockey coverage out the ass for any market. Doesn't matter if you're about the Wild or nationally. We got you covered. So
I spend half my workday reading all the other athletic hockey writers, so
it's impossible to keep up with, really.
Yeah. Ooh, I just said I don't do work at work. Shouldn't have said that. Whoops.
This might be a video episode.
You can edit. You can always edit that out.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Ben. Any final thoughts?
I think it's as much as it's hard for Wild fans, to deal with the inevitable disappointment that is the Minnesota Wild. I don't know. I think that the playoffs are still a lot of fun to watch, and I think that people should enjoy them. And not just the Wild too. Like, enjoy the other playoff series that we're seeing as well. Like, I think that a lot of Wild fans get really kind of tunnel visioned in on how disappointed they are in the Wild. They don't appreciate how good the series might be, and they definitely don't appreciate how good the other series going on might be.
And at least we're not Caps fans.
Yeah, as they just lost in overtime a few minutes ago. That's brutal.
Yep. 2-0 lead, lost again.
I am out of beer. I guess I should have had a final thought in mind when I threw the question out to everyone, but
yeah, not a bad idea.
I don't know. I guess, and I'm guilty of this. Like, I've been kind of beating like a dead horse with Minnesota sports and the optimism that just sinks through the floor all the time. But I don't know. Let's try to be optimistic this week. Let's take a page from Derek's book and look at it with a glass half full.
It's way more fun that way. I've always said this about the Vikings. It's way more fun if you just throw blind optimism at it and just watch no matter what. You might get let down, but enjoy the ride.
I was literally about to say, like, you are the only person I know that has blind optimism about the Minnesota Vikings, and I can't fathom how you do that, but I applaud you for doing that. Yeah, no,
I gotta survive somehow.
Yeah. No, let's look at everything this week optimistically, and the Wild only trail in the series 2-1, and they've done so without Brian Suter, and they've done so with, Jared Spurgeon at, 60%. So there's reason for hope there. So, and then, yeah, as Ben said, like, watch the other playoffs, because, good Lord, like, I tell people who don't watch hockey a lot, like, if you're going to watch hockey, like, turn it on in mid-April, watch playoffs, because that's incredible hockey that, we only get to see, a couple months of the year, and it's great. It's a good reminder for why you love hockey, because it's that good. So, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and thanks to Derek for joining us. And again, you can find his analytical work at The Athletic Minnesota. Does a good piece once or twice a week, alongside the great Mike Russo. And then, of course, all the other great writers there. Like, it's incredible. Like, John Krasinski, like, I don't ever read him a whole lot, but when I do, like, I'm like, man, he's a really good writer, and I wish I paid attention to the Wolves more.
Yeah, I mean, we even have stuff now like boxing coverage, like from Zach Peters, who did an awesome story about Caleb Truax, who's from Minnesota. So, I mean, it's there's really something for everybody, even if you don't like hockey. Which, if you're listening to this and you don't like hockey, then what the hell is wrong with you? But
yeah, if you made it this far and you don't like hockey, and something's wrong with you. But yeah, no. Again, thanks to Derek for joining us, and then you can find him again on Twitter at State of Stats, and then you can find Ben and myself on Twitter at Ben Remington, at Giles Farrell. The podcast also has a Twitter account at GATG Wild Podcast. We're also on Facebook by the same handle. We also have Instagram. No, we're not getting Snapchat. We also have a YouTube
dangerous.
Channel. Yeah, no, we don't need that, especially with my my lifestyle.
You guys have a grinder?
Oh God! No, we really got to shut it down. you can find our Otherwise Fine podcast on iTunes. Please leave us an iTunes rating if that is how you indeed listen to this show. Then you can find us on SoundCloud. We're also on Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify. Really, we are anywhere. We try to make sure we reach a wide audience. So, yeah, anywhere you listen to podcasts, we are there. So we are also writing for a website called Zone Coverage. You can find that at zonecoverage.com. Go to zonecoverage.com for Ben and I when we write on the Minnesota Wild. And also find Heather Rule, Tom Schreier. They write there as well. And yeah, that can wrap it up for this week. And we will talk to you again next week.
Later.
Thanks for having me, guys.
It's not resiliency. You're making it sound like we're good. That's all. I'm done.